From the moment you wake, your carnal mind is trapped in a frantic, exhausting loop of noise, desperately trying to fix, heal, and manipulate the fleeting conditions of your daily life. You frantically run from one spiritual technique to another, treating divine consciousness like a cosmic vending machine designed to solve your heavy earthly problems. The greatest tragedy of this human struggle is the terrifying illusion of identity. You blindly attach your eternal being to fleeting material conditions, constantly repeating the destructive lies of the ego. I am sick. I am facing financial ruin. Or I am broken and alone. By aggressively claiming these temporary shadows as your permanent identity, you actively reinforce the very suffering you are so desperately trying to escape. You are absolutely not a sick person seeking health. Nor are you a poor person manifesting wealth. These are simply heavy human concepts. Dark clouds passing through the vast, untouched sky of your pure awareness. So the terrifying truth that shatters the spiritual marketplace is that your endless striving is the exact wall blocking your freedom. Pause. Take a slow, deep, silent breath. You must completely drop the exhausting burden of trying to change your human experience. There is absolutely nothing to fix, nothing to seek, and nothing to heal. Step gently into the profound, empty space of the great nothingness. Allow the desperate human will to completely dissolve right now, and rest in the silent, absolute perfection of your untouchable true nature. To understand the radical nature of the great nothingness, you must first brutally examine the insidious nature of the carnal mind. The carnal mind is the dense, conditioned human intellect that violently splits the seamless, majestic perfection of divine reality into terrifying fragments of duality. It is entirely obsessed with judging the material world, frantically categorizing every single earthly experience into agonizing opposites, good and bad, healthy and sick, abundant and poor. This fragile ego thrives exclusively on the terrifying illusion of separation, completely blinding you to the unbroken wholeness of infinite consciousness. When you blindly operate from this carnal mind, you are constantly reacting to fleeting material appearances, falsely believing these dense physical conditions have actual power over your eternal being. The human intellect is a factory of suffering, tirelessly manufacturing the very problems it desperately tries to solve. It creates the agonizing concept of disease, then frantically seeks a human cure. It invents the terrifying illusion of financial lack, then violently struggles for material supply. You must clearly understand that the carnal mind absolutely does not know God, cannot comprehend spiritual reality, and is incapable of experiencing true peace. Every time you allow this terrified intellect to define your reality, you willingly step into a suffocating prison of limitation, allowing shadows to convince you the sun has ceased to exist. Its entire existence depends on keeping you trapped in a perpetual state of exhausting effort, desperately trying to fix a material world that is nothing more than a fleeting, unstable mirage. This devastating illusion leads directly to the most catastrophic mistake in human history: the desperate practice of praying to a distant God to forcefully change material circumstances. Joel Goldsmith profoundly warned against this suffocating trap, calling it the fatal error of spiritual materialism. When you frantically beg the divine to heal your fragile physical body, to pay your earthly bills, or to fix your broken relationships, you are absolutely not practicing true spirituality. You are blindly using God as a cosmic vending machine, feeding it desperate prayers and expecting material miracles in return. You must deeply understand why this approach violently fails. When you pray for physical healing, you fundamentally affirm the absolute reality of the agonizing sickness. When you forcefully visualize earthly abundance, you permanently confirm the terrifying reality of your material lack. Your very effort to escape the problem mathematically guarantees its continued existence, because your exhausting struggle constantly feeds it with the power of your belief. Divine consciousness absolutely does not work for you. It beautifully works as you. The infinite intelligence of the universe absolutely does not exist to rearrange the dense furniture of your temporary human life. It absolutely does not reach down to magically fix a human tumor or forcefully change a spouse's mind. Thriving on spiritual materialism completely prevents divine action, because it reinforces the terrifying lie that God and your problems are two separate, warring powers. The moment you use spiritual principles to forcefully manipulate earthly outcomes, you completely lose the path, trapping yourself in an endless cycle of devastating disappointment. You must now awaken to the staggering truth that completely shatters the illusions of the carnal mind. Your material circumstances are absolutely not who you are. The heavy conditions of your human life, whether it is a devastating medical diagnosis, a crushing financial bankruptcy, or the agonizing pain of a bitter divorce, are absolutely nothing more than fleeting, dark clouds passing harmlessly across the vast, infinite sky of your pure, eternal awareness, just as the majestic sky is absolutely never stained, damaged, or fundamentally altered by the fierce storms that temporarily rage within it. Your true spiritual identity is eternally untouched by absolutely any human experience. You are absolutely not the storm. You are the silent, boundless space in which the storm appears and inevitably dissolves. The agonizing physical pain, the terrifying bank statements, the bitter human conflicts possess absolutely no independent power, no eternal substance, and no underlying divine law to sustain them. They are merely the dense carnal mind misinterpreting the flawless divine activity of the universe. When you finally stop violently identifying with these passing shadows, when you completely refuse to claim them as your permanent identity, their false, terrifying power instantly collapses. You realize with breathtaking clarity that your true self has absolutely never been sick, never lacked infinite supply, and never been separated from divine love. The great nothingness demands that you completely stop fighting the passing clouds. You simply remain as the silent, untouchable sky, peacefully watching the terrified human drama unfold without ever once believing it is real. In this absolute stillness, the heavy illusions effortlessly lose their grip, revealing the unshakable perfection of your true being. To completely shatter the terrifying illusions of the carnal mind, you must awaken to the most profound revelation ever delivered to human consciousness, the staggering truth of the sacred name, I am. When the great mystic Moses stood before the burning bush, completely stripped of his fragile human power, the divine voice did not reveal a distant, external deity. It majestically proclaimed, I am that I am. Centuries later, the Master Jesus did not speak from his limited human personality when he declared, I and the Father are one, or I am the way. The terrified human intellect tragically misinterpreted these breathtaking statements, blindly believing they were the arrogant claims of a special historical human being. But you must clearly understand that Jesus was absolutely not talking about his fragile physical body. He was speaking entirely from the infinite, eternal dimension of pure consciousness. I am is absolutely not a historical relic. It is the living, unshakable reality of your own existence, right in this exact fraction of a second. The word I is the ultimate spiritual name of the infinite divine source. Whenever you say I, you are absolutely not referring to your dense physical form, your agonizing human history, or your temporary material circumstances. You are speaking the sacred, eternal name of God. To use the word I and attach it to human limitation, saying, I am sick, I am poor, or I am afraid, is the ultimate tragedy. It is the carnal mind desperately trying to drag the infinite majesty of the divine down into the suffocating mud of material existence. You must completely and ruthlessly separate your understanding of I am from the fragile, terrified human ego. The personal sense of self, the exhausting human identity defined by a name, a body, and a personal history is an absolute, terrifying illusion. It has no actual substance, no eternal life, and absolutely no divine power. The true I am within you is absolutely not a separate, personal consciousness desperately trying to become spiritual. It is the majestic, infinite presence of the universe, flawlessly expressing itself as your individual awareness. You absolutely do not have a consciousness. You are pure, untouched consciousness itself, appearing in human form. This divine presence lacks absolutely nothing, fears absolutely nothing, and needs absolutely nothing from the heavy material world. When you finally stop violently identifying with the terrified human personality, you discover that the true I am is forever complete and entirely untouched by the violent storms of human experience. Your agonizing struggles, your desperate spiritual seeking, and your frantic efforts to improve your earthly life are all generated by the false personal ego. The infinite presence absolutely does not struggle. It does not pray for physical healing or frantically visualize earthly wealth. It simply rests in the absolute, silent certainty of its own majestic perfection. When you surrender the false personal self, the radiant light of the I am effortlessly dissolves the terrifying shadows of human limitation. Precisely because pure presence cannot know disease, lack, or fear, because the true I am is your eternal identity. You must completely abandon the exhausting belief that the kingdom of God is a distant geographical location somewhere in the sky, or a future reward waiting after the body dies. The carnal mind desperately projects salvation into a non-existent future, keeping you forever trapped in the agonizing waiting room of human suffering. But Jesus explicitly commanded us to stop looking low here or low there, revealing the most revolutionary truth in spiritual history. The kingdom of God is entirely within you. You must clearly understand that this majestic kingdom is absolutely not a physical place. It is your current, unshakable state of consciousness. It is the absolute, silent reality of the eternal present moment. You do not travel to the kingdom through exhausting spiritual effort, frantic prayer, or decades of grueling meditation. You simply and quietly recognize that it is already the absolute reality of your being, right here and right now. The moment you completely stop trying to reach a distant God, you beautifully collapse the heavy illusion of time and space. The infinite abundance, the radiant health, and the profound peace of the kingdom are absolutely not rewards you must frantically earn. They are the very fabric of your present consciousness. When you completely drop the terrified human mind and rest entirely in the pure awareness of I am, you immediately step into the majestic kingdom. There is absolutely no separation to bridge, no journey to make, and no future to wait for. The great nothingness effortlessly reveals that you are already standing on holy ground. To enter the profound sanctuary of the great nothingness, you must undergo the most terrifying and radical shift in human experience, the complete and absolute release of the personal sense. The personal sense is the exhausting, a heavy illusion that you are a separate, isolated human being walking the earth with your own fragile physical body, your own private bank account, and your own agonizing list of personal problems. It is the terrified voice inside your head that constantly screams, I need to be healed. I must protect my money. Or I am desperate for human love. You must clearly understand that this personal ego is absolutely not a real entity. It is a ghost, a dense shadow manufactured by the carnal mind to keep you imprisoned in a perpetual state of fear. Releasing the personal sense does not mean violently fighting your human thoughts or forcefully trying to kill your ego. It means you completely and finally stop claiming it as your identity. You absolutely must stop identifying as a sick person desperately seeking a miraculous cure. You must absolutely stop identifying as a terrified, poor person frantically trying to manifest material wealth. As long as you fiercely hold on to the heavy identity of a struggling human being, you actively block the radiant flow of divine consciousness. You must bravely release every single human concept you hold about yourself. Let the exhausting story of your past trauma, your medical history, and your financial failures completely drop into the abyss of nothingness. You absolutely do not have a personal life to fix, improve, or save. Your only true life is the infinite, unshakable life of God, seamlessly expressing itself exactly where you stand. When you completely surrender the desperate need to be a somebody with a personal human story, you instantly create the silent, empty space for infinite divine intelligence to operate without a single fraction of human interference. Once the heavy burden of the personal sense is completely surrendered, you must brutally confront the most misunderstood truth in all of spiritual seeking. God absolutely does not fix your human problems. God does not heal human diseases. God does not pay material debts. And God does not magically repair broken human marriages. The fragile carnal mind will violently rebel against this staggering truth. But you must realize that if God actually knew about your agonizing physical tumor or your terrifying financial bankruptcy, those conditions would instantly become eternal, indestructible spiritual laws. God knows absolutely nothing but its own majestic, unbroken wholeness. God is pure, absolute perfection, and in the infinite light of divine consciousness, there is absolutely no darkness, no lack, and no disease to be found. Therefore, when you frantically pray to a distant deity to come down and destroy your earthly sickness, you are desperately asking God to do something completely impossible. You are asking God to recognize and interact with a terrifying illusion. The disease, the lack, and the conflict are simply the heavy, blinding mist of the carnal mind, misinterpreting the flawless divine activity of the universe. They are hypnotic mirages appearing on the dense screen of human perception. God does not fix a mirage. God is the absolute reality that exposes the mirage as nothingness. When you finally stop violently forcing spiritual principles to attack your human problems, and instead quietly rest in the unshakable recognition of divine wholeness, the heavy illusion automatically collapses. The tumor miraculously dissolves. The financial lack effortlessly vanishes. And the bitter conflict beautifully melts away. Absolutely not, because God reached down to magically heal them, but because you entirely withdrew the terrified human belief that was artificially keeping them alive. The illusion simply dies of starvation when you stop feeding it with your exhausting human fear and your frantic spiritual effort. This breathtaking revelation now invites you to sink infinitely deeper into the absolute, silent surrender of all human effort. You must completely drop the heavy, agonizing weapons of your spiritual struggle. You have spent decades violently fighting your material conditions, exhausting yourself with desperate prayers, frantic visualizations, and forceful mental affirmations, only to find yourself sinking deeper into the terrifying quicksand of human suffering. Now, you must completely stop trying to make anything happen. You absolutely must not try to become spiritual. You must absolutely not try to demonstrate a miraculous healing. And you must absolutely not wait for a future earthly result. The great nothingness demands your complete, unconditional surrender to exactly what is. Sink deeply into the profound, empty silence where the terrified human ego finally dies of exhaustion. Let go of every single desire to forcefully manipulate your human existence. If agonizing pain appears in the physical body, do not fight it. Simply rest in the silent awareness that pure consciousness cannot be touched by pain. If terrifying financial ruin knocks at the earthly door, do not panic. Sink into the profound nothingness, completely trusting that infinite supply is the very fabric of your eternal being. This is absolutely not a passive, lazy human resignation. It is the most supreme, majestic state of spiritual power. It is the absolute cessation of the violent human will that has been continuously blocking divine action. In this sacred, untouchable space of unknowing, You finally allow the infinite intelligence of the universe to flawlessly live your life. You become a perfectly clear, transparent window through which divine love effortlessly shines, orchestrating absolutely every detail of your existence with a staggering perfection that the fragile human mind could never possibly comprehend. Just rest. Seek nothing. Fix nothing. Need nothing. Let the absolute, a silent majesty of your eternal perfection, completely swallow you whole. To truly embody the staggering revelation of the great nothingness, you must ruthlessly master the profound, majestic art of absolute non-reaction. The fragile carnal mind is entirely addicted to the violent drama of human existence. It feeds voraciously on terrifying earthly crises to validate its own false existence. When devastating bad news suddenly strikes, when the earthly doctor delivers a terrifying terminal diagnosis, when the human bank account aggressively hits zero, or when a cherished relationship violently shatters, the dense human ego instantly explodes into a blinding panic. It frantically screams that you must violently fight back, desperately defend yourself, or forcefully manipulate the material conditions to survive the storm. This agonizing, immediate reaction is exactly how the carnal mind completely hypnotizes you, brutally dragging you out of the silent kingdom of God and throwing you directly into the suffocating quicksand of human suffering. You must clearly understand that the moment you emotionally react to a terrifying material appearance, you have already lost the spiritual battle. Because your violent reaction is your absolute confirmation that the illusion is real. Joel Goldsmith profoundly called the antidote to this agonizing trap divine indifference. This is absolutely not a cold, callous human detachment or a lazy, passive resignation. It is the majestic, unshakable recognition that your true, eternal self remains completely untouched, untarnished, and unthreatened by absolutely any human experience. You become profoundly indifferent to both the terrifying problems and the desperate human need for miraculous demonstrations. You must brutally refuse to jump onto the exhausting emotional roller coaster of spiritual seeking, where you are frantically celebrating earthly healings one day and agonizingly mourning human failures the next. When the violent storm of human disaster aggressively rages, you absolutely must not fight the crushing waves of circumstance. You simply and beautifully rest in the unchangeable, absolute awareness that flawlessly observes all fleeting human experiences without ever being altered or damaged by them. The terrifying news is merely a shadow dancing on a wall. It has absolutely no independent power to touch the infinite reality of your divine being. Your non-reaction completely starves the illusion of its power, anchoring you permanently in the absolute, silent perfection of the eternal now. When the paralyzing wave of human terror violently washes over you, you must execute the most radical, breathtaking shift in human consciousness. You must immediately step back into the silent emptiness and quietly ask, what exactly is perceiving this terrifying fear? The fragile ego will desperately scream that you are afraid, but you must ruthlessly sever this false identification. You absolutely must not fight the agonizing fear, suppress the human panic, or frantically try to replace it with a positive, exhausting affirmation. You simply become the vast, it's silent, untouchable space that quietly watches the fear arise, peak, and inevitably dissolve. You realize with staggering clarity that the fear is simply a dense, temporary human emotion violently passing through awareness. It is absolutely not the awareness itself. You are absolutely not the terrified person who is desperately lacking money. You are pure consciousness, temporarily observing a false human thought of lack. You are absolutely not the sick, agonizing physical body. You are eternal, indestructible spirit, silently watching a passing material shadow of disease. The fragile human mind is deeply conditioned to blindly believe in separation, to violently react to the terrifying appearances of the physical senses, and to obsessively demand immediate earthly solutions. But the moment you quietly step back and refuse to take the terrifying appearance personally, you completely remove the heavy human will that constantly blocks divine action. You must look directly through the terrifying illusion of the terminal illness or the crushing debt, and flawlessly recognize the divine reality that eternally stands right where the human problem seems to exist. The true I am within you absolutely cannot be threatened by a medical diagnosis. It cannot go bankrupt, and it cannot experience rejection. By resting in this staggering realization, you effortlessly withdraw your exhausting human belief from the terrifying problem. You simply observe the agonizing human drama as if it were happening on a distant movie screen, completely knowing that the fire on the screen cannot possibly burn the silent watcher in the theater. From this absolute, unshakable space of silent non-reaction, something breathtaking and miraculous effortlessly emerges. When you completely surrender your desperate human attempts to fix the terrifying problem, when you entirely stop forcefully trying to manipulate the material outcomes, infinite divine intelligence beautifully and naturally takes over. The staggering truth is that profound spiritual wisdom, flawless earthly solutions, and absolute physical healings absolutely never arise from the frantic, agonizing panic of the human ego. They flawlessly orchestrate themselves from the silent, empty void of the great nothingness. The same majestic divine intelligence that effortlessly grows forests and moves galaxies is perfectly capable of managing the microscopic details of your temporary human life. But it can only do so when your violent, terrified human interference completely ceases. When you rest entirely in divine indifference, needing absolutely nothing and wanting absolutely nothing to change, your consciousness becomes a perfectly clear, transparent window. You absolutely do not become a passive, irresponsible human being. Rather, you become fully and miraculously available for pure divine action, without your heavy, exhausting mental interference. Human life perfectly organizes itself. Unexpected financial opportunities effortlessly appear. Deeply broken relationships miraculously harmonize without a single spoken apology. And agonizing physical diseases simply vanish into the nothingness from which they came. These breathtaking transformations occur absolutely not because you frantically earned them through exhausting spiritual struggle, but simply because you completely got out of the way. You have permanently shifted from an exhausting human being, desperately trying to survive a terrifying world, into the very embodiment of pure consciousness, flawlessly expressing its own infinite perfection. You simply watch, in absolute, silent awe, as the divine gracefully lives your life. The most devastating trap on the spiritual journey is the agonizing, deeply ingrained habit of using sacred spiritual principles as desperate human tools to acquire fleeting material things. The fragile carnal mind approaches the infinite majesty of divine consciousness with a heavy, terrifying agenda. You violently struggle for decades, exhausting yourself with meditation, frantic affirmations, and desperate prayers, secretly hoping that if you just become spiritual enough, God will finally reward you with radiant physical health, a perfect human romance, or overflowing earthly bank accounts. This is the tragic illusion of spiritual materialism, and it absolutely guarantees a life of crushing, endless disappointment. You are blindly attempting to use the eternal, indestructible power of the universe to forcefully manipulate the terrifying shadows of the human dream. When you use the sacred I am simply to beg for material money or a cured physical body, you are brutally degrading the divine. You are treating the infinite source of all existence like a cosmic servant, frantically expecting it to fix a terrifying human illusion that God absolutely does not even know exists. Because divine consciousness cannot and will not validate the dense illusions of the carnal mind, your desperate spiritual efforts inevitably fail, leaving the fragile ego completely shattered, bitterly complaining that spirituality does not work for real problems. It fails precisely because you are absolutely not seeking God. You are frantically seeking the temporary, material loaves and fishes, remaining entirely trapped in the heavy, suffocating quicksand of separation, consciousness. When you are finally confronted with the staggering, the radical truth of the great nothingness, the absolute demand to completely stop trying to get anything from God, your fragile carnal mind will violently and aggressively rebel. This terrifying resistance is entirely natural. For your entire human life, the dense ego has desperately maintained its false existence by constantly seeking, fighting, and forcefully controlling material outcomes. When you strip this terrified intellect of its heavy weapons, when you absolutely refuse to give it a problem to solve or a spiritual technique to practice, it explodes into a blinding, agonizing panic. It will violently scream that resting in silent awareness is dangerous, irresponsible, and completely delusional. It will fiercely demand that you must do something to save your failing human business or heal your agonizing physical body. You must clearly understand that this violent mental resistance is simply the terrified shriek of a dying illusion. The carnal mind is deeply, brutally conditioned to believe that human effort is the only power in the universe. It is utterly terrified of the profound, empty silence, because in that majestic nothingness, the false personal ego completely ceases to exist. You absolutely must not fight this agonizing resistance or harshly judge yourself for experiencing this terrifying human doubt. You must simply and quietly observe the mind's violent tantrum without giving it a single fraction of a second of power. Do not argue with the terrified intellect. Simply let it exhaust its frantic screaming against the unshakable, silent walls of your eternal awareness. As the violent storm of the ego's resistance slowly collapses into pure exhaustion, you are gently invited into the most breathtaking, the sacred shift of your entire existence. You must seek the silent presence entirely for the sake of the presence itself. Absolutely never for the fleeting material benefits it might bring. You must completely drop the heavy, agonizing agenda of the human seeker. Do not approach the infinite stillness to magically heal a tumor, to desperately pay a past due bill, or to forcefully repair a broken human marriage. You must enter the holy sanctuary of your own consciousness simply to rest in the radiant, absolute perfection of what you truly are. You commune with the divine simply because communion is the ultimate, majestic ecstasy of the soul. When you truly touch this profound, silent awareness, you realize with staggering clarity that the pure presence is the absolute fulfillment of every desire. You absolutely no longer want the physical healing because you recognize you are eternal, indestructible spirit. You absolutely no longer crave the earthly wealth because you feel the infinite, inexhaustible abundance of divine consciousness flowing seamlessly as your very being. The breathtaking paradox of the great nothingness is that the exact moment you completely stop using God to get material things, the exact moment you desire absolutely nothing but the silent joy of the presence, the entire human world beautifully and flawlessly harmonizes. But by then, you are so deeply anchored in the majestic reality of the eternal I Am that you simply watch the earthly miracles unfold with profound divine indifference. Forever satisfied by the silent, untouchable grace of just being, to permanently anchor the staggering revelation of the great nothingness into your daily human existence, you must ruthlessly interrupt the agonizing, hypnotic momentum of the carnal mind. You absolutely do not need hours of exhausting, the formal meditation to touch the infinite majesty of the divine. You simply need to master the profound, breathtaking practice of the 10-second pause, right in the middle of your most chaotic, terrifying human day when the fragile intellect is frantically screaming about unpaid bills, looming deadlines, or agonizing physical symptoms. You must completely and abruptly stop. For 10 absolute seconds, you completely drop the heavy, suffocating burden of being a human being. You absolutely do not use this brief, sacred pause to frantically pray for a quick solution, to forcefully visualize a positive outcome, or to aggressively judge your current material circumstances. You simply and beautifully freeze the terrified human ego in its tracks. In these 10 seconds, you demand absolutely nothing from God. You seek absolutely no material change, and you completely refuse to fix any human problem. You simply breathe, silently recognizing the vast, untouchable space of pure awareness that exists completely independent of the frantic human drama. This microscopic fraction of eternity is the ultimate, majestic act of spiritual rebellion against the human condition. It completely shatters the heavy illusion of continuous human struggle, instantly and effortlessly starving the terrifying carnal mind of the frantic momentum it desperately needs to survive. As you master this profound pause, You are beautifully pulled out of the terrifying quicksand of linear time and violently thrust into the staggering reality of the eternal present. The fragile carnal mind absolutely cannot survive in the present moment. It exists entirely as a parasite, feeding on the heavy, agonizing regrets of a dead past and the terrifying, imaginary anxieties of an unborn future. You must clearly understand that your past human traumas, your previous earthly failures, and your old physical diseases have absolutely no actual reality in this exact fraction of a second. They are merely dense, ghostly memories playing on the screen of your human intellect. Similarly, the terrifying future scenarios of financial ruin or physical death are absolutely nothing but dark, hypnotic mirages manufactured by the ego to keep you paralyzed in a perpetual state of fear. The majestic I am absolutely does not exist yesterday, and it absolutely does not exist tomorrow. It exists entirely and exclusively in the eternal, unshakable. Now, when you violently drag your awareness away from the heavy illusions of time and anchor it completely in the present moment, the entire structure of human suffering effortlessly collapses. In this absolute, silent present, there is absolutely no past history to violently regret and absolutely no future crisis to desperately solve. There is only the infinite, radiant perfection of divine consciousness, flawlessly expressing itself in complete harmony. The great nothingness is not a distant destination you will eventually reach. It is the breathtaking reality of this exact, eternal second. When you finally stop violently escaping the present moment through frantic spiritual seeking, you realize with absolute awe that the majestic kingdom of God has been fully present all along, patiently waiting for you to simply stop running. You must absolutely not treat this profound revelation as just another fascinating spiritual theory to be filed away in your exhausted human intellect. You must permanently cross the sacred threshold from heavy human theory into actual living experience right in this exact, unshakable moment. As your eyes scan these very words, as you hear the silent rhythm of this transmission, I demand that you completely drop everything. Stop trying to intellectually understand. Stop frantically trying to remember these principles for later. Absolutely cease all exhausting mental effort right now. Let the heavy, terrifying human identity completely fall away from your shoulders like a discarded garment. You are absolutely not the tired, anxious person reading a spiritual text. You are the silent, boundless, indestructible awareness in which the reading is occurring. Notice the profound, empty silence that exists perfectly beneath the noise of your human thoughts. Sink deeply into that majestic stillness. Do not ask it for absolutely anything. Do not expect a sudden, dramatic, mystical experience. Simply rest in the absolute, silent certainty of your own divine existence. Feel the sheer, breathtaking relief of needing absolutely nothing, seeking absolutely nothing, and changing absolutely nothing. You are completely safe, eternally whole, and flawlessly perfect, right in this exact, untouchable fraction of eternity. The agonizing, lifelong search is permanently over. The terrifying human struggle is finally and absolutely finished. Let the majestic reality of the great nothingness completely consume you. As you rest endlessly in the pure, radiant silence of the eternal now, we have finally reached the absolute, majestic end of the exhausting human journey. You must absolutely not try to use this final moment to frantically solve one last earthly problem, to desperately figure out your human future, or to violently force a spiritual breakthrough. The exhaustive, terrifying era of fixing your fragile life is permanently over. You have absolutely nothing left to learn. Absolutely no more heavy spiritual concepts to blindly memorize, and no more exhausting mental techniques to forcefully practice. Let the terrified carnal mind completely surrender its desperate, exhausting need to understand the infinite. I invite you now to entirely stop the agonizing machinery of your human thinking. Close the heavy, frantic doors of the intellect and gently draw your absolute attention to the quiet, rhythmic rise and fall of your breath. Feel the profound, silent, untouchable emptiness that exists perfectly beneath the frantic noise of the material world. This breathtaking emptiness is absolutely not a dead void of nothingness. It is the infinite, radiant fullness of pure divine presence. It is the majestic, silent, unbreakable reality of exactly what you are when you completely stop trying to be a struggling, terrified human being. Sink endlessly into this sacred, unshakable stillness. There is absolutely nowhere else you need to go, nothing else to achieve, and absolutely no one you need to become in the eyes of the earthly world. You are entirely safe in this infinite, silent vastness. As you rest deeply in this breathtaking sanctuary of the great nothingness, completely detached from the terrifying illusions of human suffering, let this profound truth quietly settle into your eternal awareness. If you have truly surrendered the heavy burden of the personal ego and stepped into the silent majesty of your indestructible identity, do not offer a loud, frantic human response. Instead, I quietly invite you to leave a simple, silent confirmation in the comments below, just the two sacred words, I am. This is absolutely not a noisy earthly engagement, nor is it a desperate human claim to magically get something from the universe. It is simply the quiet, unshakable recognition of your pure, eternal being. A gentle, silent nod to the infinite consciousness that flawlessly exists exactly as you. Let those two majestic words stand alone in the vast emptiness, completely stripped of all human stories, earthly conditions, and terrifying material limitations. You are absolutely not a fragile human being, desperately searching for the distant divine light. You are the radiant, eternal light itself, flawlessly illuminating the passing shadows of the earth. Rest now, completely undisturbed, in the absolute perfection of your true identity. The heavy,